Remember this in the darkest moments, when the work doesn't seem worth it and change seems just out of reach. Out of our willingness to push through comes a tremendous power. Use it. Stacey Abrams.
I would like to be able to take out my pocket constitution and say that the equal citizenship stature of men and women is a fundamental tenet of our society, like free speech. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
It takes years as a woman to unlearn what you have been taught to be sorry for. Amy Poehler.
Good morning. Today, March 8th, marks International Women's Day. First celebrated in 1911 and supported by over 1 million people, the day has moved beyond one specific group and instead belongs to the collective. International Women's Day is not country, group, or specific organization. Rather, it is about the humanity of women and celebrating their achievements while also calling for greater equality. Gloria Steinem, world-known feminist, journalist, and activist, once explained, "The story of women's struggle for equality belongs to no single feminist, nor to any one organization, but to the collective efforts of all who care about human rights." So, it is the day before break. So, a lot of you guys are wondering, what's the fuss? Feminism was like a man-hating thing that belongs to a generation long ago. But I am here to debunk all those myths. You're thinking, surely we are equal by now. But simply, we are just not there yet. Progress in the feminist movement has required important strides in two separate spheres. The political, that is what happens in our courts and the laws we make, and the social, what happens in our hearts and in our minds. So let's start with the political. How can equality between the sexes be secured legally? Let's start with a quick polling question. True or false? Men and women have equal rights under the Constitution. Okay, so there is some debate. If you say true, you are not alone. 80% of Americans assume that that kind of protection before the law for men and women is stated explicitly. Yet the reality of the matter is that women are not mentioned in the Constitution at all. Indeed, words like freedom and equal had to be added to the Constitution, in the First Amendment protecting free speech, and the 14th Amendment protecting equality before the law. So why is it that we as a republic feel the need to make these edits? Why must we seemingly add what many Federalists of the 18th century would say is implied? Because the stating of it matters. The deliberate nature of having a right specifically stated in the law of the land has driven us to a more perfect union since 1791. So what would a constitutional amendment protecting gender equality even look like? Well, we are in luck because we've had an example for nearly 100 years. The Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced by activist Alice Paul in 1923. Working to build on the heels of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, the ERA stated, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the account of sex." Unfortunately, the bill failed to gain any traction for 50 years, until it was brought to Congress, again in 1972. At that point, 2/3 of both the House and the Senate voted in favor. But, as my US history students know, amending the Constitution requires an extra step of gaining 3/4, or 38 states in total, of the states to sign on. The amendment had 35 states vote in favor, but failed to gain the last 3 by the expiration date of 1982. And so it lay dormant until two states, Nevada and Illinois, ratified the ERA in 2017 and 2018 respectively. That brought the total to 37, which means only one more to go. Okay, again, I know what you're thinking. A lot has changed, Mrs. Keough, since 1923. We don't need this kind of protection anymore. Given the great work of the suffragettes at the beginning of the 20th century, the strategic approach of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the ACLU in the 1970s and 80s, and the bravery of women of color to build a more inclusive feminist movement in the modern era, one must ask, perhaps women have enough protections from discrimination through laws, such as the Equal Pay Act, Title VII, Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the Violence Against Women Act. While these laws do protect women from gender-based discrimination, court rulings over the years since their passages have created legal precedent regarding how the laws can be interpreted and enforced, often to the detriment of what the laws were originally intended to protect women from. For example, the Equal Pay Act of 1963. The courts have decided that in order to be acceptable, the Equal Pay Act can only be proven when the employer is paying the employee based on their gender. Because pay disparities are often the result of much more nuanced elements of society, like being pregnant, giving birth, things like that, the legislation has not closed the gap. In 2017, based on the standard of what white men earned in comparable jobs, white women earned 77% of that. African American women earned 61% of that. And finally, Hispanic and Latino women earned only 53% of that. Additionally, the Violence Against Women Act of 1994 sought to empower victims of domestic violence by allowing them to sue their attackers in federal court. Yet a Supreme Court ruling voided the provision with the argument that it was an overreach of the federal government's power under the Commerce Clause. Obviously, the legislation without this key element narrows its ability to address the power discrepancies present in domestic abuse cases. So what does this all mean? Well, without Equal Rights Amendment, gender-based discrimination is becoming harder and harder to prove in a court of law. Until the U.S. Constitution is amended to explicitly state that equality of rights cannot be denied or abridged on the account of sex, the political and judicial victories women have achieved over the past 2 centuries are vulnerable to erosion or reversal at any time, now or in the future. Today, 94% of Americans favor the Equal Rights Amendment. So in order to understand why we have been unable to cross that threshold, we must turn from the legal and political sphere of our feminist movement and into the social sphere. That is the hearts and the minds of people. So here's a story to get us started. This past week, there was a cycling race in Belgium. As is customary, the race was divided into a men's and women's race. The men started first and were given a 10-minute buffer from the start of the separate women's race. All went according to plan until one female cyclist closed the gap. She was approaching on the men's race when the officials suddenly stopped the women's race. They had no action plan for the far-reaching possibility that a female would actually catch up to the male racers. So in a panic, they stopped the race in order to neutralize the groups. The woman, consequently, lost her momentum and the lead and then the race. Why did this happen? What's the big deal? Why can't the race officials simply let her catch up to the men? Would that hurt the integrity of the race more than actually stopping it? So this anecdote speaks to the discomfort that feminism brings to the surface. That sheer panic of the race officials reveals the free fall people feel when contemplating 2 things. 1, women are closing in and becoming more equal to men. And 2, what does that mean for men? Or more specifically, is there really only so much power and opportunity to go around? So let's take a look at another sports example. In January, the National Hockey League held their annual All-Star Game. The league, in an effort to build support for the budding National Women's Hockey League, invited female players to serve as the demonstrators for the skills competition. Just hours before the competition, one male participant fell ill, and the league decided on the revolutionary idea of asking one of the women to actually compete. Kendall Coyne Schofield accepted the challenge to participate in the fastest skater event. Coyne Schofield took to the line understanding that her lap would mean much more than the cash prize. She embraced the challenge and gave the winner a run for that money. It was a victory. She placed above one male competitor, and young female and male players around the world saw her crush it. It was a feel-good moment for everyone. Then came the realization that one of the women completing the demo in another event actually came in 3 seconds faster than the man who won it. Brianna Decker had demoed the passing accuracy event with near perfection, but because she was not an official competitor, she was not eligible for the prize money. Social media exploded with the hashtag #PayDecker. While there was a delay, the response differed from the race officials in Belgium. No one put their head in the sand and avoided the question of this zero-sum power game. Instead, both the hockey equipment company CCM and the NHL took action to recognize the winner. Decker was also awarded $25,000, a prize much appreciated as the professional female players cannot live off their league salary alone. Additionally, the other female demo players were awarded money to a charity of their choice. So here's the question. What was so hard about that? Decker's talent was legitimized when we didn't run from the realization of equality, but rather we embraced it. Now, should those female players have been competitors from the start? Yes. But this kind of breakthrough is really still important. This was captured perfectly in the recent Nike ad narrated by Serena Williams. The premise of the ad is that before any trailblazer embarked, it was always crazy. The first woman to run a marathon, first woman to win Grand Slams, have a baby, then come back for more. Or even, first woman to win an NHL skills competition. It was all crazy, until they did it. Indeed, it is doing the crazy thing that changes the hearts and minds of people. So where does that leave us on International Women's Day? We have work to do in our community. I want you to find your inspiration in the crazy. It was crazy to add female students to such an academic institution as Westminster. Then we did it in 1971. It was crazy to have a female outstanding scholar. And then we had Deborah Stanton in 1980. It was crazy to have a female head prefect. Then we had Suzanne Catherine Daglio in 1994. It was crazy to support female athletics. Then we had fan buses to the field hockey playoffs in 2008. It was crazy for us to display feminist art in Fern Hall. And then we had Sophia Kusisto. It was crazy for a female student to exude confidence and community at assemblies. And then we had Julia Chris. It was crazy for a male student to care about feminism. And then we had Joelle Groves, Emmett DeCanter, and Elliot Kennard. It was crazy for a mother of small children to be a head coach of a varsity team. And then we had Miss Devaney, Miss Heckman, and Mrs. Crosby. It was crazy to think we could bring about positive institutional change in our own community, and then there was you. I know you're thinking about it. I've heard your voices in the All is One Feminist Alliance meetings. I've seen your breakthroughs in U.S. history research papers. I've shared meals with you while you contemplated the reality of a woman's perspective in our community. So here are my hopes for you on March 8th, International Women's Day. Keep thinking, keep learning, and keep building a consciousness that empowers you to the true ideals of feminism, which are to better a society through gender equality. That work will allow young women to break the habit of looking in the mirror and only seeing the things they would change. It will help young men to break the pressure of prescribed masculinity and to instead let their emotions and empathy towards others show. Just as the movement is a dual endeavor of the political and the social, there is also a duality in its benefits. Feminism serves both women and men. Thank you.